In this episode, we will be looking at Python's loops. Most programming languages contain multiple types of loops. In Python, we have two to choose from, the for loop and the while loop. Now, the reason you want to loop over stuff is if you have a lot of repetitive things to go over, or you just want to iterate over a range of values. So let's create a range to loop over. Python comes with a very handy range tool, just called range, obviously. So if we do, let's do 5, just call it like that. So it returns a range object of 0 through 5. In Python 2, it used to return a list. So let's just go ahead and change that into a list so you can see better what's going on here. Okay, so in Python 2, you get a list of 0 through 4. In Python 3, which is what we'll be using, it returns a range object. Either way, you can still loop over this because the range object is an iterator. So let's take the for loop and try iterating over this range. So here we go. For something, in this case we'll use number, in the iterator, which is going to be a range this time. We'll print out the number. Alright, let's see what happens. Okay, as you can see, we go for number in the range of 5, print each number in that range, and then it does. That's really cool. You can do the same thing with just using a list. So if we wanted to use that code that we had above, we could actually just take it, just grab that, and go over here, just do for, like number in. This time it'll be iterating over the list item instead of the range, but it'll still give the same result, as you can see. Now, this gets more interesting when we actually start looping over other types of iterators. So let's create a dictionary, because you can actually iterate over those as well. So we'll just create something real quick. We'll call it 1, 1. Oops. And 3. Alright. So let's loop over the keys in the dictionary. For a key and a dict. Oops. Or just print out the key. Now you note I've been using actual good named variables, but you could actually call the key or the number anything that you want. You don't have to call them key or number. Anyway, I'll show you here in a second. Okay, so that looped over the dictionary and it pulled out the keys. You'll notice that they're actually in order, but this is unusual because dictionaries are hash tables and they typically don't return stuff in any particular order. So if we run that code multiple times, it might print out in different orders. We'll see if it actually does, but I kind of doubt it will. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So if you want to make sure that you print the keys in the right order, you can actually sort the keys. Let's take a look at that, since that's something different and new. So, let's see, we want to do keys equal to our dictionary. Dot keys. Let's see what kind of object that is. Okay, so we have a dict keys object, but it's unsorted. Even though it looks sorted here, it really isn't. Basically, if you print out a dict a few times, you'll notice that sometimes it's not in the right order. I can't actually get it to do it today, but if you have like a really big dictionary, you'll notice that they're not always in the order that you want them to be. So anyway, let's sort the keys. So I'll just do this and call Python sorted method on our keys object. And this will give us a nice little list of keys that are in the right order. Sorted will sort them in ascending order by default. So then you can just go for key in keys, print the key. But let's make it a little bit more interesting. Let's actually print the dictionary's values. So let's do this. Here we go. So in this case, we looped over the keys in the right order, and then we printed the dictionary values that correspond with that particular key. All right. Now sometimes when you're using a loop, you want to break out of it. Python comes with a very handy break method. So let's just try that real quick. So for key and keys, I'll say if the key is equal to 2, whoops, sorry about that, we'll break. The rest of the time I'll go ahead and print the key out. Let's see what happens when we do this. So it looped over the keys, it printed the first one out, and then when it hit the second key, it noticed that it equaled 2 and it broke out of the loop. So you don't get to see the number 2 printed or the number 3 printed. Now we're ready to move on to the while loop. The while loop is basically just while some condition. So let's say we have I equal less than like 10 or something. And we'll print out the i's. If I equals something like the number 5, we'll break out. And actually, let's just try this because I think you'll find this really interesting. Oh, whoops, we didn't define I. That's my bad. I equals 0. Okay, here we go. You'll notice that it just keeps printing and printing and printing. What did we do wrong here? We created an infinite loop, that's what we did. Because we never incremented the variable I. So let's just restart the shell. And we'll try that again. So I equals 0, while I is less than 10. Print I. And we need to actually increment I, so let's make I plus 1. And see what happens. Okay, so each time through this while loop, it goes through, it prints the number, and then it increments I by 1, so I plus 1. And then after each time it increments, it goes back and checks this expression again to see if it's still less than 10. Once it hits the number 10, it breaks out of the loop automatically. Let's try that loop that I was trying to do originally. So let's make I back to 0. And we'll still do while I is less than 10. This time we'll still print out I. But we'll also try to break out early. So we'll say 5. And we'll just break here. And then we'll also use a little shortcut. You can do I plus equals 1 to just increment it instead of doing I equals I plus 1. Just a little handy little shortcut you guys can use in your learning. Okay, so here we got 0 through 5 printed out, and then when it hit I equals 5, it broke out of the loop. Alright, most people will tell you, especially in beginning classes, that you don't want to create an infinite loop like we did at the beginning. But there are some times when you do want an infinite loop. For example, sometimes you'll use an infinite loop in GUI programming, like when you want to create a desktop user interface. That's known as an event loop. It basically waits for the user to click on something, and then it acts when that user clicks on it. Otherwise, it would never do anything because it's not going to be waiting for it. You'll also see client-server type operations use an infinite loop as they wait for the user to do something. Okay, we have one more thing to cover, and it's actually the else condition. So you can actually use else, which you learned about when we were doing if, else, and elif. The else statement in loops only really executes if the loop completes successfully. So the primary use of the else statement is for like searching for items, which sounds kind of weird, but here I'll illustrate with a for loop. So first we'll create a list. Just call it my list equals, we'll just do that range thing we did before. And we actually need to convert this to a list. let's do that too. All right, so now we have our list. And now we just need to loop over it in my list. Okay. If I equals 3, print and we'll just print out each I and go back one, do an else. And then, okay, and in our else we'll print if it's not found. We'll print something different. Okay, let's try this out. So, basically what this will do is it'll loop over each item in the list and it'll look to see if the item ever equals 3. If it does, it'll print item found and then break out of the loop. But what if you want to do something if the number is never found? Well, that's where the else condition comes in. So you go through the list and you never find what you're looking for. Well, if that happens, then you probably want to raise an error or do something completely different, like ask the user for more information. This is where the else condition comes in, and that's what we do here. In this case, we can make list not have the number 3 in it. Let's just do that so you guys can see what I'm talking about. And then you want to do something completely different. So we'll just create a list that has 1, 2, 5, and 6 in it. Then just go ahead and rerun this code. In this case, it went through the entire list, printed out each item, and it never found the item I was looking for, which was the number 3. So as I said, this is really useful for like error handling, or you really want to ask the user something different, or other situations like that. At this point, you're ready to use the for loop and the while loop in your own programs. Have fun, and I'll see you next time.